My daughter Joanna told me she was doing great. She said her husband, Todd, was the kindest man alive, always rushing to make her morning coffee, never letting her lift a finger around the house. She said he'd pick her up when it rained, cook homemade chicken soup when she was sick, and whenever she had a mood swing he'd do his goofy husband dance just to make her laugh. I listened and smiled, my expression as natural as I could make it. But my fingers gripped the edge of my phone the entire time we were on that video call. Her face was pale. Not fair-skinned or light. No, it was the kind of pale you see under the fluorescent lights of a hospital room. Her lips curved into a smile, but her eyes, they were empty, dull, like someone had turned the lights off inside her. This was the third time she'd said, "I caught the flu, so I'm at the hospital." The last time it was a stomach bug. Before that she'd tripped down the stairs. But Joanna was the most cautious person I've ever known. She used to grip the handrail just to walk down a couple of steps. There's no way she would have just fallen. And the stomach pains? Bad enough for 4 fluids, but she chalked it up to too much dessert last night. I've been a mother too long to fall for that. I know the sound of a lie told just to keep me from worrying. A lie tangled in guilt and fear. "Don't always think the worst, Mom," she said with a soft little laugh on the other end. "I'm really okay. Stop overthinking." I nodded. Just nodded. Didn't press. If I don't ask, she'll keep talking. And the more she talks, the more I can piece things together. But she was quicker than I expected. 3 minutes in, she wrapped it up with a quiet, "I should go grab something to eat. Let's talk later." The second the screen went black, I felt a weight settle in my chest. I don't believe her. She says she's happy, but I don't believe her. That night I called my son Jason. He was half distracted, mashing buttons on his game controller while answering me. "Mom, you're overthinking it. Didn't Joanna already tell you a bunch of times? Todd treats her really well. They're doing fine." "But she's always in the hospital," I said. "Doesn't that strike you as strange?" "She's always been kind of frail," Jason said with a shrug I could hear in his voice. "Remember when she was a kid? Stomach aches all the time. That's just how she is." He chuckled. "And besides, I know Todd. The guy's awkward, shy. Definitely not the type to hurt anyone." I didn't answer. He didn't notice. Still chuckling, he added, "Wait, you're not thinking about driving over there, are you? That's what, a 3-hour trip?" "Yes," I said. "I am thinking about it." That made him pause. His tone finally shifted. "Wait, you're not actually serious?" "Jason, this isn't me being dramatic." I sat under the kitchen light, my hand resting on a printed bus ticket. "She's my daughter. A mother knows when her child is lying. Just like a bird knows when the wind is about to change." "But she told you not to come." "She told me she's fine," I cut in. "And then she told me not to worry. 3 times. Each time her eyes darted just a little more." He went quiet for a beat. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. "Just be careful, okay?" The next morning I didn't tell Joanna. I didn't tell anyone. I boarded a long-distance bus to Cedar Falls. I traveled light, nothing to raise alarm. Just 3 changes of clothes, a small notebook and a black handbag. Inside were some cash, my driver's license and 30 years' worth of mother's intuition. She told me she was fine, but she was in a hospital. She told me she fell, but she was limping. She told me it was just bad luck, but her eyes looked like a startled deer's. Wide, glossy, scared. She didn't tell the truth because she didn't want me to worry. But I couldn't sleep until I knew the truth. So I went looking for it. When I arrived, I didn't head straight to her apartment. Instead, I checked into a small motel right across the street. The front desk clerk gave me a cheerful smile. "Here for a little getaway, ma'am?" I smiled back. "Just visiting my daughter." Truth is, I didn't even know if I'd get to see her. Her apartment building, Willow Creek, looked upscale. Secure. Cameras on every corner. A doorman at the front desk. No way an uninvited guest could just stroll in. But I wasn't in a rush. I could wait. I found a seat at the outdoor patio of a cafe across the street, ordered a latte, milk, no sugar, and kept my eyes on the building's entrance while slowly sipping. 1 hour passed. Then the sun began to sink lower in the sky. Still no sign of Joanna. I texted her, "What are you up to, sweetheart?" She replied almost instantly, "Working late again, Mom. Don't worry about me." But I had been watching that front door all afternoon. And Joanna hadn't stepped out once, not even a shadow. At 9 o'clock that night I came back. This time I was standing right on the front steps of her building, eyes fixed on the entrance, not daring to blink. Then a voice behind me broke the silence. Husky, sharp-edged and tinged with suspicion. "Hey, you with the FBI or something?" I nearly jumped. Spun around and found myself staring at an elderly woman in pajama pants, fuzzy slippers and a silk robe, her silver hair piled high on her head. In one hand she held a cat leash, no cat in sight. "Excuse me." She squinted at me, studying me for a long second, then leaned in like we were sharing government secrets. "Or maybe you're a private investigator. I've been watching you since the afternoon. Girl, even the neighbor's dog doesn't stake out this building like you do." I couldn't help but laugh. "No, I'm just..." She clapped her hands. "Say no more. I support you. If you're here to catch a cheater, I won't say a word. I can't stand that man in 4B. Always out on the balcony late at night, smoking like he owns the building. Whole place reeks of ash the next morning." I laughed again, really laughed, for the first time in 2 days. She reached out a hand. "Margie Thompson. Retired schoolteacher. Vice president of the Neighborhood Gossip League. Coffee enthusiast. Proud to supply any information in the name of justice." I took her hand. "Madison Dawson. I'm here to protect my daughter. And I'm trying to find the truth." Something in her expression shifted. Her eyes sharpened with a flicker of understanding. "Your daughter lives here?" she asked, her tone softer now. I nodded but said nothing more. She plopped down on the stone steps beside me, thoughtful. I knew something was off with that unit lately. My breath caught. "What did you hear?" She leaned in a little. "Last Wednesday, maybe 2 in the morning, I was up getting water. Didn't latch the balcony door all the way and I could hear voices outside. At first I thought it was just a couple arguing. But then," she hesitated, her voice dropping. "Then it didn't sound like an argument anymore." She paused, her face tightening. There was something crashing. And a woman. Sobbing. Begging. My fingers curled instinctively into fists. Margie turned to look at me, her voice gentling. "Your daughter. She's that quiet one, right? Long hair. Keeps to herself. Doesn't talk much to anyone." I nodded again. She sighed. She seemed like the kind who'd keep her pain to herself. "It's a shame. This place looks upscale, but trust me, it's full of men in suits with rotten hearts." My eyes stung. Margie gave my knee a pat. "But you're here now. You did the right thing. I may not be quick on my feet, but I've got ears everywhere. I walk my cat around the building 3 times a day. I know when every houseplant gets watered." I couldn't help it, I burst out laughing again. He grinned. "I'll be out front tomorrow morning at 7 catching the sun. If you need info, just come find me." "Thank you, Margie." "Don't thank me, I'm just doing my duty for justice," she said, sitting up straighter with mock pride. Then she leaned in and whispered, "But seriously, that man gives me the creeps." I knew he was bad news. Even his eyebrows look like a TV villain's. I laughed again. For the first time I didn't feel entirely alone. I didn't go back to the motel that night. Instead, I spent the entire evening in a nearby 24-hour diner. The lighting was dim but just bright enough for me to see the sticky note in my hand. On it, Joanna's apartment access code. She'd mentioned it offhand once. I wrote it down without even thinking. I never imagined I'd actually use it. But the voice in my head was getting louder and clearer. She wasn't happy, she was covering up her unhappiness. And I wasn't just here for the truth. I was here to get her out. I lost count of how many times I checked the front of the building that day. Maybe the 7th time, Margie gently tapped my arm and whispered, "He's gone. Dark gray suit, car keys in hand. Looks like he left in a hurry. Left shoe was untied." I looked up at her. She looked even more energized than yesterday, dressed in a clean sweater, and I could smell a hint of floral perfume. "You going in?" she asked. I nodded, sealing the code from the sticky note into memory. Margie leaned closer, lowering her voice. "If you're not out in 30 minutes, I'm calling the cops. And don't worry about me overreacting. I'm the only one in this building with 2 official police reports on file." I managed a weak smile. "That makes you my most reliable backup." I crossed the street, palms sweating. The keypad trembled under my fingers as I entered the code. When I heard the lock click and the door release, I nearly forgot to breathe. The hallway was eerily quiet, like walking through a tunnel lined with thick velvet. The elevator ride felt slower than the day before. I could hear my own heartbeat. When I reached her floor, I stood in front of her door for a moment. Then, without knocking, I entered the code. The door opened. Inside, the apartment was dim. The only light came from a blue glow in the corner, an air purifier humming softly. The curtains were shut tight. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of old medicine and something faintly rotten. There was a bowl on the coffee table, dried soup caked at the bottom, a few strands of hair clinging to the rim. One of the sofa cushions was caved in, its edges frayed. Everything felt lifeless. On the wall hung a wedding photo. Joanna smiled stiffly, while Todd stared into the camera with a look that wasn't affection. It was suspicion. Like he was guarding something. I slowly opened the bedroom door. Joanna was sitting at the edge of the bed, motionless, her back to me. Her hair was a tangled mess draped over her shoulders. A bandage was wrapped around her right ankle, which was badly swollen. Her hands clutched the blanket like it was the only thing tethering her to safety. "Joanna," I whispered. When she turned around, I almost burst into tears. Her face was gaunt. Her lips colorless. Beneath her left eye, a bruise still lingered, yellowing but visible. Her eyes, those soft gray eyes, were empty, dulled to ash. But when she saw me, that numbness cracked. Panic rushed in to replace it. "Mom? What are you doing here?" Her voice was hoarse, like sand scraping against her throat. I stepped forward and gently wrapped my arms around her. She flinched, pulling back slightly. "You shouldn't be here. If he finds out, he'll lose it, he'll go crazy." "Joanna." I cupped her face in my hands. "You're not safe here. You can't stay in this place alone any longer." She lowered her head and tears began falling, one by one, onto the back of my hand. "He locks the door from the outside," she whispered. "Unplugged the landline. My phone, he only lets me call approved numbers. I'm only allowed to FaceTime you from the hospital because he knows there'll be people around. That's the only reason he lets me do it. Why didn't you call the police?" "I tried." Her voice dropped so low I had to lean in to hear. "But he told them I was unstable. When the officers gave me water, he'd slipped something into it, my sedatives. Then he made me sign a guardianship consent form. Said if I didn't cooperate, I'd be institutionalized." As she spoke, she buried her face deeper into the blanket. I was burning up with a fever. The nurse brought in a bunch of forms. He stood right next to me watching. I couldn't even read what I was signing. Later, when I fought back, he showed me the papers. Said I'd given him legal authority as my psychiatric guardian. That he could have me admitted against my will. I felt the room tilt around me. He hadn't just hit her. He'd wrapped her in a legal noose, polished and invisible, cloaked in concern. And now she was trapped in a cage built out of paperwork and lies. 2 weeks ago he pushed me down the stairs, she said, her voice shaking. Told the doctor I was just clumsy. But the doctor could tell. And he said, if I open my mouth, he'd have someone hurt you. Her lips quivered. "Mom, I was so scared. I thought he really might come after you. I didn't want anything to happen to you." I reached up and gently smoothed her hair. "You don't need to worry, sweetheart. He can't touch me. You've done everything you could, Joanna. You're stronger than you think. And now I'm here. I'm going to protect you." Her voice trembled. "I went to the hospital once after that, but he made the doctor sign a confidentiality agreement. One of the nurses, she slipped me a copy of the report. I hid it, but..." My eyes sharpened. "Where is it?" She hesitated, then pointed toward the nightstand. I opened the drawer and found a torn manila folder, stuffed in the back beneath an old scarf. Inside there was a worn medical report dated 2 weeks ago. It read, "Right ankle fracture likely caused by external force." I folded it carefully and slid it into my bag. "Put on some shoes. Take my coat. We're leaving. Right now." "How?" She blinked. "Yes. The sooner the better. Margie's going to stall the front desk." I slipped my coat over her shoulders and grabbed a scarf from the couch to wrap around her neck. She tried to stand but cried out in pain, her whole body tensing. "I can't walk," her voice broke. "Mom, I can't even stand." I glanced at the clock on the wall, hesitated for half a second, then crouched down in front of her and lifted her onto my back. Just as we reached the apartment door, we heard the ding of an elevator alert, followed by a harsh buzz. The display above read, "Out of service. Maintenance." I clenched my jaw and turned toward the stairs. One step at a time I carried her down. Each flight felt like hammering another nail into my spine. My arms shook, my breath came in bursts, but I had never felt more certain in my life. Her cheek rested on my shoulder, and in a whisper barely louder than breath she said, "I'm sorry, Mom." I bit down hard to keep from crying. All I could manage was, "You're my daughter. You never have to apologize for needing help." And I carried her, my girl who used to laugh so freely, who now was battered and bruised, away from the thing she'd been told was a marriage. We reached the lobby. I was about to push through the doors when the front desk clerk called out, "Ma'am? Are you all right? You don't look so good." I forced a shaky smile. "Thanks for asking. This is my daughter. He had a bit of a blood sugar drop. I'm just getting her home to rest." He looked like he might press further, brows furrowed, until Margie swept in out of nowhere, waving. "Susan. You finally made it out. Come on, I've been waiting forever," she called, full of cheer. Then she turned to the clerk, grabbing his attention. "Young man, can you help me check if my cat snuck out the back door again? You know how fast she is." While he was distracted, I limped us through the doors, one arm around Joanna's back, the other guiding us around the corner where our rental car was already waiting. I opened the back door and gently helped her into the seat. She clung to my arm, eyes closed, lips barely moving. "Mom, you really came," she whispered. I tucked the blanket tighter around her and kissed her forehead. "I swear, sweetheart, no one is ever going to hurt you again." 10 minutes later, Todd came home. He was humming a tune, holding a bag of takeout in one hand. He tapped the keypad and pushed the door open. "Joanna." No answer. He stepped into the bedroom and froze. The blanket from the bed was gone. The closet door was wide open. Drawers were empty. The report folder was still on the coffee table, but its contents were missing. His face darkened inch by inch, fists clenching tight. "Joanna." His voice echoed through the apartment, loud and furious. But this time no one answered. I drove all the way to Spring Hill. It's a place we called home for over 20 years. A town so small it doesn't even have a Starbucks, but it holds the calmest skies and the most familiar air. I could drive every street and turn every corner with my eyes closed. Joanna sat in the passenger seat, silent the entire way. Her face was turned toward the window, the wind tossing her hair, but nothing could lift the shadow in her eyes. By the time we got home, the sky was starting to fade into dusk. My house is an old one, a 2-bedroom cottage I fixed up myself. Simple, quiet, with a little vegetable garden in the backyard. She used to complain there was no Wi-Fi signal out here. But now, standing in the doorway like a bird who's barely made it back to her nest, she said nothing. Just leaned against the frame and stared for a long while. I changed the bed linens and made her favorite, creamy chicken soup the way she loved it as a kid. She had one bowl. Nothing else. That night she didn't go into the bedroom. She curled up on the old sofa in the corner of my room, wrapped in a blanket, and fell asleep. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of her murmuring in her sleep. I moved closer, straining to hear. Her voice was faint, broken. "Don't lock the door. I promise. I won't run." I sat beside her, took her hand in mine, and stayed there the rest of the night without closing my eyes. The next morning, I took her to the community clinic in town. The nurse on duty was Tracy, an old friend of mine. Sharp tongue, sharper instincts, and someone I trusted with my life. "You actually brought her back?" she muttered as she pulled on her gloves. "I just saw her husband on Facebook a few days ago, posting those devoted husband pics like he's some damn saint." "All lies," I said. Tracy rolled her eyes. I could tell he was trash. Guys like that, narcissism in every step they take. She examined Joanna's ankle and her expression turned grim. "This isn't a sprain. This is a direct trauma, blunt force likely from a fall. Your daughter didn't trip. Someone did this to her." I nodded. "I didn't hide anything. Tracy, I need your help finding proof. She was treated at Cedar Falls Memorial. I want her records." She raised an eyebrow. "Not through the front door, you won't. Not without her written consent. But I can poke around the system's edges, see what's hanging out in the corners." I handed her the torn medical report. She bent over it, fingers tracing along the frayed paper. Paper code matches. Definitely issued by Cedar Falls Memorial Neurosurgery Department from the look of it. My heart stopped for a second. Neurosurgery? She didn't tell me that. Tracy frowned. You want me to reach out to the attending physician? I can dig up a name. I leaned closer. Do you know anyone there? Someone on the inside. Off the books. She gave me a sideways glance, then lowered her voice. My cousin transferred there last year. Works the front desk in the ER. I'll see what I can pull out of her. I felt like I could finally breathe again. I just need records. Dates. Prescription names. Even a screenshot. If I can get that, I can take it to a lawyer. Tracy nodded. Just be careful. If that man's got a brain, he'll start tracing you too. I gripped the torn report tighter and said flat and cold, then let's see who moves faster. Tracy kept her word. By the following afternoon she texted me, there's a record. Her intake and imaging data are in the system. My sister snagged a screenshot. I was sitting on the bench in my backyard when I opened it, hands trembling as the image loaded. It was grainy, but I didn't need it to be sharp. I recognized Joanna's name and the date instantly. The exact week she told me she'd just slipped and fallen. The screenshot showed a scheduled scan, marked incomplete. I didn't need to ask why. Todd would never have let her go through with that test. What did it mean? It meant her injuries had never been fully documented. But the system had a registration record, and that was enough. I told Tracy to get in touch with the doctor who saw Joanna and ask if they'd be willing to call me. That evening my phone rang. An unfamiliar number. Hello, is this Joanna Miller's mother? The voice on the other end was calm, measured, professional but gentle. This is Dr. Patrick from the Cedar Falls Memorial ER. I was the attending physician that night. Your daughter said she had fallen, but we had suspicions about possible domestic violence. Her demeanor was evasive and she refused to name anyone involved, so we logged only a preliminary report. Later, her husband called to cancel the follow-up appointment. I gripped the phone tighter. That preliminary report. Is there any way I could get a copy? He paused. Officially, only the patient can request that with a signed release form. I understand your situation. I can prepare an informal treatment summary, just a basic note describing her condition. It won't carry legal weight, but it'll be something. I understand, I said. That's all I need for now. I'll write it by hand on personal stationery, he said. I'll fax it directly, no hospital system involved. I knew what that meant. He was risking something for us. I gave him Tracy's home fax number and thanked him. As I ended the call, I finally felt the smallest breath of relief ease through my chest. But at that same moment, miles away in Cedar Falls, Todd stood frozen in the middle of his living room, his face like granite. The apartment had been torn apart. Drawers left gaping open, couch cushions flipped, the floor under the bed swept clean. But the one thing he was looking for, the medical report he'd sworn Joanna was never allowed to copy, was gone. He grabbed his phone and dialed building security. Didn't you say the building had 24-hour surveillance? His voice was low, seething. Pull the footage. Tuesday night. Between 8 and 9. I want to see who came through that front entrance and who went down my hallway. He hung up and reached for a sticky note on the counter. A string of digits scribbled in faded ink, familiar but not quite his own. That number. Joanna had said it once in passing. In case Mom ever needs to come, I gave her a code. Todd's eyes went cold. He opened his laptop, searched Susan's address and cross-referenced her registration info, Spring Hill. Seconds later he walked out the door. When I stepped back inside, Joanna was curled up on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, gazing out the window. There was something clearer in her eyes now, less fog, less fear. When she saw me, she asked softly, "Mom, are you okay?" I sat down beside her and pulled out the screenshot. "Sweetheart, we got our first piece of evidence." She didn't say anything. Just leaned over and rested her head on my shoulder. "We've still got a long road ahead," I whispered, "but I promise, you're not walking it alone anymore." She nodded gently and murmured, "Thank you, Mom." I was just about to say something else when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Margie. "A strange man called my house just now. Said he was looking for your daughter." His tone was off. She didn't mention a name. But she didn't need to. I knew. Todd. Faster than I'd expected. I didn't show Joanna the message. She'd only just begun to eat again, to sleep through the night without waking in panic. I wasn't going to pull her back into that fear. Not yet. Instead, I calmly put the phone away, stood up and closed every curtain in the house. I locked the kitchen door, then leaned into the front door and threw the old deadbolt. This house didn't have fancy security, but when it came to keeping danger out, every click of metal was its own kind of comfort. Then I walked to the bedroom, opened an old storage box and dug to the very bottom. I pulled out a weathered address book and flipped through the pages until I found the name, Dr. Patrick. I dialed the number listed. It went straight to voicemail, his private inbox. I left a message. Hello, Dr. Patrick. This is Joanna's mother. I received a warning from a friend. Someone is looking for us. I can't be sure if he'll try to contact you, but if he does, please tell him you have no authorization to release any medical information. You once said you'd help us. I need you now to hold on to every document, every note. I'll be at the hospital in person tomorrow morning at 10. As I hung up, I realized my palm was soaked with sweat. The next morning, I pretended everything was normal. I made breakfast as usual. When I fried the eggs, I added extra black pepper. Joanna had only ever liked them that way as a child. And while the coffee brewed, I tapped the lid a little louder than necessary, just enough to let her hear me in the kitchen. Just enough to remind her. Someone was still here. She wasn't alone. She came out of her room wearing a new sweater. She looked better, still wary but steadier. Mom, she said slowly, I've been thinking, maybe I should report him. I paused, caught off guard. Are you sure? She nodded, then shook her head. I don't know. I know running isn't the answer. But I'm scared if I do report him, he'll get worse. I sat down beside her, my voice low but firm. You don't have to decide that today. But I can help you do one thing. We're going to gather everything. Every piece of evidence. We'll seal it in an envelope, put it somewhere safe. So when you're ready, whether it's calling the police or going to an attorney, you'll have what you need. Her eyes filled just slightly, a soft red creeping around the rims. Did something happen? She asked in a whisper. You feel different today. I hesitated, then gave her a different truth. Nothing happened, sweetheart. You're safe. I promise you. Just leave the rest to me. She didn't push. Just stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. And for a long, quiet second we held on. Meanwhile, in the center of Spring Hill, a gray sedan crept slowly down Main Street. Todd sat behind the wheel, one arm resting on the open window, eyes scanning the sleepy storefronts and tree-lined sidewalks. He'd spent the whole morning asking around for my address. Not directly, of course. He'd circled the town twice instead, learning the layout, watching. Outside the local pharmacy, he spotted me stepping out with a small bag of first aid supplies in hand. He didn't get out of the car. He simply raised his phone and snapped a photo. Then opened his messaging app and typed, "She's in Spring Hill." But he didn't send it. Instead, he deleted the message. That night after dinner, I sat down beside Joanna and said, "Sweetheart, I called my cousin. She has a guest house out near Eugene. There's a vacancy this week. Quiet place, beautiful views. I thought maybe you could go there for a few days, get some rest." Joanna paused. "You want me to leave? Now?" "Just for a little while," I said as I began folding clothes into a bag. "I don't feel right letting you stay here any longer." She frowned. "Didn't you say Spring Hill was safe?" I wasn't lying, I looked her in the eyes. But sometimes the safest places are also the easiest to find. She hesitated. "What about you?" I gave her a faint smile. "I'll stay behind. Tie up loose ends. You know that's always been my specialty." She stared at me like she wanted to argue. But in the end she just nodded. The next morning I booked her a bus ticket using a neighbor's name. When Joanna stepped onto the bus, I stood at the curb and waved until the vehicle disappeared around the corner. Only then did I turn and walk away. But I didn't head home. Instead, I crossed the street to an old cafe tucked beside the hardware store. The owner was an old high school classmate of mine, retired now, running the place with quiet efficiency and a long memory. I leaned in close. "Did anyone see a gray car today? Plate ends in 623. He looked up and nodded. "Parked across from your place this morning. Stayed about 15 minutes. "Did he come to the door?" "Nope. But someone followed your daughter for about half a block." I let that sit for a moment. Then said, "Thank you." As I stepped out of the cafe, I realized something. My footsteps were steady. I wasn't running anymore. I had done what needed to be done. And now I was ready. That evening I watered the garden like always. The sun was low, the sky lavender and quiet. And that's when Todd finally showed up. He was wearing a wrinkled shirt, standing just outside the fence, his voice calling softly, "Susan." I turned, expressionless. "We need to talk," he said. I dried my hands on a rag and walked over, keeping the fence between us. My voice was calm. "You're looking for my daughter?" He gave a small smile. "I'm just concerned for her well-being." "She's safe," I said evenly. "You took her without telling me. You didn't go through the police, didn't notify anyone. That could be considered kidnapping. Illegal detainment. Interfering with a mentally unstable adult." I didn't take the bait. I cut him off, steady as stone. "Have you ever asked yourself why she didn't tell you?" His smile faltered. "She doesn't want to see you. She's afraid of you." I took a step closer. "You think I don't know what you did?" "You don't have proof," he said, voice low. "Are you sure?" For the briefest second, something flickered in his eyes. Panic quickly buried beneath arrogance. "You're just her mother. A retired housewife. You can't beat me." I held his gaze. My voice never wavered. "I don't have to beat you. I just have to make you lose." He stared at me for a long time. His jaw twitched. A twitch that might have been a smirk, or a clenched threat. Then he turned and walked away. I stood there until his gray sedan turned out of the alley and disappeared down the street. Only then did I finally let myself exhale. Back inside the house, the faxed letter from the doctor was sitting neatly on the table. The paper was already beginning to yellow, but the handwriting was crisp and clear. Patient, Joanna Miller. Suspected domestic abuse. Multiple contusions and bone fractures. Recommend psychiatric evaluation and independent guardianship. I folded it carefully, slid it into a sealed plastic bag and locked it inside the drawer. Next came the step I'd been preparing for, filing a report. I stood outside the police station, gripping the plastic evidence bag in my hand. The sunlight pressed down on my skin, but I felt no warmth. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. Behind the front desk sat a young officer, maybe early 30s, with the weary look of someone who'd had too many long shifts. His name tag read Reed. "Ma'am, can I help you with something?" he asked. I placed the plastic bag on the counter and said, calm but unwavering, "I'm here to report a case of domestic abuse and illegal surveillance. The victim is my daughter. The abuser is her husband, Todd Miller." He glanced at the contents inside the bag. These are her diagnostic summary, a system screenshot of her ER intake, a written statement from a local nurse. Everything points to long-term abuse and psychological control. He nodded, removed the documents and began reviewing them, slowly, page by page, as if he was trying to see whether the story held together. "Where is she now?" he asked. "She's staying with family. In a safe place," I said. "She's willing to cooperate, but she's not ready to return to the scene." He frowned. "You know, without her personal statement and signature, none of this is enough to file formal charges. These documents support a case, but they aren't a case." I bit down on my lip. "Did you actually read that summary?" The doctor explicitly wrote, "Suspected domestic abuse." "Suspected doesn't mean confirmed," he said, not unkindly but without budging. "And in domestic cases the line can be complicated." My voice dropped an octave, quiet, cold. Her ankle was broken when he pushed her down a staircase. Her face was stitched under her eye. She wakes up at night saying, "Please don't lock the door." Does that sound complicated to you? He paused, looking around to be sure we were alone, then lowered his voice. "I'm not saying I don't believe you, ma'am. I do. But per protocol we need more. I can open an initial situation report. If you can get her to call us, we'll record the statement and attach it to the file. If the hospital complies too, we may be able to request an emergency protective order." I nodded. "She'll call. I'll make sure she does it today." By the time I stepped out of the station, the back of my shirt was soaked. I climbed into the car and immediately dialed Joanna's number. Her voice was steadier than I expected. "Mom, did you file the report?" "I did. I gave them everything I could. They didn't open a case yet, but they're willing to document your phone call." There was a pause. Then she said, "I'll do it. Tell me what to say and I'll say it." I went silent for a beat. She used to dread phone calls, especially any mention of Todd. But now she was willing to speak. Willing to be heard. "You don't have to say what I tell you," I said softly. You just have to tell the truth. Your truth. Across the state, Todd sat in the alley behind a bar, gripping his phone like it might break in his hand. He had just gotten off a call with the hospital's administrative office. The voice on the other end was distant, polite but firm. We've been contacted by law enforcement regarding your wife's ER visit. All documentation is being preserved. Nothing can be altered or removed. His jaw clenched. He knew now, Susan was making her move. But he wouldn't go down quietly. Early the next morning, Joanna made the call to the police station. Her voice trembled slightly in the recording, but every word rang clear. This is Joanna Miller. My husband has subjected me to repeated physical and emotional abuse. He locked me in a room, cut me off from contact with the outside world. He didn't allow me to keep a phone, deleted my call history. He controlled my medical records and said if I ever went to the police, something would happen to my mom. I sat beside her as she spoke, listening to every second of it. Her facial muscles twitched at times, her jaw clenched, but she didn't stop. I'm currently staying with my mother's relatives. I'm safe for now. I'm willing to cooperate with the investigation and authorize the police to access all of my medical records. On the other end, the officer's tone shifted. We'll update the file immediately and submit a request for preliminary approval of a protective order. When it was over, Joanna turned to me on the call and said, Mom, you gave me the courage. I'm done hiding. I'm not going back into that shell. Meanwhile, at Cedar Falls Memorial Hospital, Dr. Patrick had already submitted a full legal medical summary to the hospital's legal department. This time, the file was marked legally admissible and included Joanna's authorized electronic signature. It contained her ER imaging scans, nurse logs, the physician's written assessment, and, most critically, a recording of their conversation that night in which Joanna clearly said, My husband pushed me. Todd's earlier attempt to request Joanna's medical records was also documented and appended as part of the official report. That complete file was faxed directly to the police department. At 4:30 that afternoon, Officer Reed called me back. Mrs. Dawson, he said, we've received the formal medical report along with your daughter's recording. We've submitted it to our higher office. The police will now launch an official investigation into Todd Miller, and a temporary protective order has been issued. He is prohibited from coming within 300 feet of either you or Joanna, effective immediately. I didn't speak at first. I just exhaled, long and deep, like I'd been holding my breath for weeks. Thank you, I whispered. Don't thank me, he said. This happened because you didn't give up. You protected your daughter, and yourself. That evening, a courier from the station delivered the official protection documents to my door. I called Joanna with the news. That same night, she boarded a bus from Eugene and came home. Later, I sat at the kitchen table and opened a bottle of red wine I hadn't touched in years. Joanna walked in from the living room. I looked up at her, a soft light in my eyes. Today, I said, you told the truth in your own voice for the first time. She froze for a second. I gently slid a glass across the table to her. We both smiled. And we raised our glasses together. The day Todd received the official summons from the police happened to be his 37th birthday. Word had it he'd planned to take a few friends out for dinner that evening. He was going to announce his upcoming investment in a tech startup, a flashy little move to mark a new chapter. But around noon, a uniformed officer showed up at the door of his office and handed him a document, sealed in red. Mr. Miller, the officer said calmly, you are under investigation for domestic violence, psychological abuse, and medical record tampering. We're requesting your full cooperation. Todd didn't explode, not then. He froze for a few seconds, then let out a cold, flat laugh. She's making it up. She's unstable. You're basing this on an informal report, for God's sake. The report has since been amended and certified by the attending physician, the officer replied evenly. In addition, your wife authorized full disclosure of her medical records in a recorded call. Several documents now point to a consistent pattern of abuse. Todd said nothing. His gaze dropped, fists clenched so tight his knuckles turned white. He knew. This time there would be no talking his way out, no silencing it with charm or control. The ground was shifting beneath him and he couldn't stop it. Meanwhile, Joanna and I sat in a quiet meeting room on the third floor of a law office. She wore a soft cotton blouse, her hair tied in a low ponytail. There was still a trace of pallor in her face, but she sat straighter now, more composed than she'd been in weeks. Across from us sat Ms. Harper, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney Tracy had connected us with. She specialized in domestic abuse cases and didn't waste words. After flipping quickly through our stack of documents, she looked up and said, "The police have already secured a temporary restraining order. Once the DA files charges, we can pursue civil action, damages for emotional distress, and a request to freeze a portion of his assets." Joanna spoke softly. "Will I have to go to court?" Harper nodded. "Probably once. A hearing. You won't need to speak in detail. Just confirm your willingness to provide evidence. We'll do the talking." I reached over and squeezed her hand. "You're not doing this alone." Joanna looked at me, her eyes glassy, but the tears didn't fall. Not this time. A week later, the local news picked up the story. The headline read, "Suspected coercive abuse case enters legal process. Mother helps daughter escape control." They didn't name Todd, but anyone who knew him recognized the profile photo immediately. His stiff jaw, that signature coat, the side angle unmistakable. That evening my phone rang. It was Margie, voice bubbling with excitement. "I knew he wasn't right," she said triumphantly. "I'm so glad the truth's coming out. Seeing your daughter safe, Susan, I'm just so proud of you." I smiled into the receiver. "Thank you for sending that message when you did. If it hadn't been for you, I might have been too late." She clicked her tongue. "Next time you file hero paperwork, make sure you include Neighborhood Watch MVP." We both laughed. And for once, the laughter wasn't a mask. Todd didn't get away with it in the end. Police found several incriminating emails in his inbox. Messages he'd sent to staff at Cedar Falls Memorial, asking them to remove inaccurate records, and even offering compensation in exchange. Those emails became key evidence for the prosecution, confirming his attempt to obstruct an investigation. With Joanna's formal statement added to the case, the police submitted a full recommendation to prosecute. The court approved it without hesitation. The trial didn't drag on. At the hearing, Todd's attorney tried to spin the events as emotional conflict and accidental harm, but that defense collapsed fast. Against the medical records, diagnostic summaries, phone recordings, and a tight, consistent timeline, every excuse fell apart. He didn't go to prison, but he was sentenced to 2 years probation, mandatory psychological counseling, and public behavior restrictions. But his real punishment came elsewhere. The investors in his tech venture pulled out. The board voted him off the company. His social media, once buzzing with friends and business contacts, went silent overnight. Some even deleted photos with him entirely. No prison bars. Just the slow, public erasure of a man who thought he was untouchable. Joanna didn't attend the trial. That day she sat in the backyard, the morning sun touching the wildflowers at her feet. She texted me, "Mom, I couldn't bear to watch him fall apart. But knowing you're there, that's enough for me." I replied, "You're alive. That's the victory." When spring came, we moved. Not to hide. Not to disappear. Just to start walking a new direction. It was a quiet house near the edge of a forest, with a little balcony where the morning light fell just right. Joanna began taking online courses in trauma counseling, slowly rebuilding a rhythm to her days. I signed up as a volunteer at the town library. Sometimes I read to children. Sometimes I shelved books. Both felt like healing. One afternoon, Joanna and I were out buying groceries. On the sidewalk, we saw a boy holding an umbrella over his mother. The umbrella was too small, he was half soaked while she stayed dry. I glanced at Joanna. She was watching the boy too. Then she smiled softly, gently. And in that moment I knew. He had come back. Not just in body but in spirit. The real Joanna. The kind, clear-eyed, quietly strong girl I remembered. She was here again. People sometimes ask me, "How did you do it?" I always tell them, I didn't do anything extraordinary. I don't have a law degree. I've never been part of a women's rights group. I'm not rich. I'm not powerful. I live in a small town. And I'm just a mother. But I had one thing. I never stopped believing her. Even when the world said she was dramatic or fragile or unstable, I knew. She wasn't crazy. She was hurt. She wasn't broken. She was surviving. Me. I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who stood behind her. And didn't leave.
I'm Joanna, and I woke up in the sunlight. The curtains were open. The light poured in, soft and warm, falling across the blanket in scattered patches like a quiet reminder, you're still here. It took me a few seconds to register that I was lying somewhere safe. The room was small. White walls. No ceiling fixtures, just a row of plants along the windowsill, their little green leaves pressing outward toward the light. A breeze slipped through the crack in the window, cool but not oppressive. I sat up slowly. My neck was a little stiff. The pillow was new, Mom must have swapped it in last night, just like her to think of even that. I slid my feet over the edge of the bed. The wooden floor was cool beneath my skin. Not cold in the way that made my body tense up, but in a way that simply reminded me I was barefoot and alive. I reached down and slipped on a pair of thick socks, careful not to make noise, as if someone might snap awake and get angry. Then I remembered. It's just me and Mom here. No Todd. No one to scowl at me for turning on the light too early. No one to snap, "Are you trying to get my attention?" No one to suddenly rise from the couch, grab my wrist, and demand, "Where the hell were you?" No one to force me, again and again, to explain that I had just taken out the trash. I sat at the edge of the bed and listened. From the kitchen, I could hear the gentle clatter of lids, the hiss of a kettle beginning to boil, and the soft hum of Mom singing under her breath. And suddenly, I wanted to cry. Not from sadness, but from something unfamiliar, something loosening in my chest and pushing outward. Relief. Maybe even peace. I didn't think I'd ever wake up to a morning like this again. But here it was. And I was in it. I didn't realize right away that I was trapped. If you asked me which words should have raised the first red flag, I probably couldn't even tell you. Todd was too good at being just enough. Thoughtful. Reliable. Smart. And that thing I mistook for maturity, control. Not long after we met, he started ordering for both of us. "You love the spicy shrimp pasta, right?" he'd say. Then place our order without waiting for me to speak. I didn't think it was strange. I thought it was sweet. It felt like the first time someone really knew me. Later, he'd say, "Don't wear that skirt, it's too short. I don't want you catching a chill." Then, "Don't go to that coffee shop anymore. Something happened there last week. It's not safe." I had never been in a relationship where someone took care of me like that. Or, more accurately, took everything. I thought it was love. Now I know, it was erasure. The year we got married, I was 27. I quit my job. Not because Todd forced me to. But because he said it, again and again. "You're always complaining about your job, about your boss, why don't you take a break? I make enough for both of us." I still remember how I replied. "Really? You're okay with me being a housewife for a while?" He smiled, ruffled my hair. "Of course. I think you're more valuable at home than anywhere else." And I believed him. But 6 months later, when I brought up the idea of going back to work, his expression changed. "Why would you do that? Didn't we agree you'd stay home? Did you forget the plan I made for you?" The plan he made for me. That phrase would go on to define our marriage. He said I was sleeping in too much, so he swapped our blackout curtains for sheer ones, said it would help reset my rhythm. He said I was cooped up too long in the house, so we started going everywhere together, workouts, grocery runs, errands. Suddenly, even a solo trip to the store felt out of reach. He said I wasn't good at making friends, so my phone contacts slowly dwindled to just him, his mother, and 2 others. One by one, the rest disappeared. And I didn't even notice. At first, I made excuses for him. He means well. He loves me. He just shows it in his own way. But by the time I understood what was really happening, I couldn't go anywhere without reporting my movements. Couldn't read a book at night without explaining what it was about. It wasn't love. It was domestication. The cruelest part? Everyone thought I was happy. He brought me to every party. Held my hand. Smiled, introduced me, "This is my wife, Joanna." Anytime I drifted off, he'd gently place a hand on my back, like a loving nudge, but really, it was a cue. "Fix your face. You get too emotional sometimes, baby." He'd say it while tapping his fingers softly against my knee. And the sound of it reminded me of a slow, persistent leak. A single drop, again and again, quietly eating away at the stone beneath it. But I didn't cry out. Back then, I thought that if I just stayed quiet, it would get better. That wasn't patience. That was numbness. The day everything changed wasn't even dramatic. Nothing violent happened. I just looked at my phone a little too long. Really, that's all it was. It was late afternoon. I was in the kitchen prepping dinner. My phone buzzed on the couch in the living room. I wiped my hands and walked over. It was Rose, my old college roommate. She just had a baby and sent me a picture. I looked at it for maybe 5 seconds. Maybe less. Todd came out of his office. "Who was that?" He asked it casually, like it meant nothing. "Rose," I said. "My college friend. She just had a baby." I smiled, set the phone down. "You remember her, right? She was at our wedding." He nodded. But his eyes shifted. "You two been talking a lot lately?" I blinked. "No, not really. Not since. I mean, we haven't seen each other in 6 months." "Then why'd you smile like that?" I froze. And only then realized how close he was standing. I just thought the baby was cute." He didn't respond. He stared at me a moment longer. Then turned and walked back into his office. I thought that was the end of it. That night at dinner, he didn't speak. And I didn't dare to. After I finished the dishes and came back to the bedroom, he was sitting on the edge of the bed, holding my phone. The screen was unlocked. "You changed your passcode?" he asked. "I updated the system," I said, trying to stay calm. "The old one stopped working." "And you didn't think to tell me? You know how much I hate being kept in the dark." "I wasn't hiding anything, I just..." He didn't wait for me to finish. He threw the phone hard onto the bed. I jumped at the sound. My whole body flinched. "You're lying," he said. Quietly. But there was something in his voice that chilled me straight to the bone. I opened my mouth to explain, but no words came out. And then, he shoved me. I hit the wall. Not hard enough to break anything, but just enough for everything inside me to shift. A flash of white shot across my vision, and it felt like a hidden switch had been flipped in the back of my mind. He was still speaking, accusing me of betrayal, of ruining his trust, of being dishonest. But I couldn't hear a word of it. I slid down the wall, clutching my chest, not from pain, but because I couldn't breathe. And I realized something. This wasn't the first time he said those things. But it was the first time he'd put his hands on me. And I did nothing. Because I didn't know what else to do. That night, I sat on the floor of the living room long after he went to bed. I waited in silence, not moving, barely breathing. Then I picked up my phone and turned it on. I didn't call the police. I didn't text Rose. I just opened my notes app and typed one line. This is not what marriage is supposed to be. Then I turned off the screen and curled up in the shadow beneath the couch, holding my knees like a child waiting for morning. Time moved quickly after that. Todd became more volatile. His anger flared faster. Sometimes he hit me. Sometimes hard enough to send me to the ER. And I kept going back. Kept going home. Because I didn't have anywhere else to go. That day, I timed it down to the second. I waited in the bathroom, ears tuned for the sound of the car pulling away, the engine disappearing around the corner. Only then did I step out. It wasn't the kind of fear that made you scream or sob. It was the kind that hollowed you out from the inside. A quiet terror, cold and sticky. I leaned against the bathroom door and gripped my phone like it was a piece of driftwood. I backed up one password-protected folder to my email. I hid a hospital report in my nightstand drawer. That was all I could do. Because honestly, I didn't believe anyone was coming. Until I heard her voice. My mom. She was standing in the doorway, in her old trench coat, her hair pulled back tight. Not panicked. Not breathless. Just ready. I almost burst into tears. She wrapped her arms around me, held me close, didn't say a word. And we started packing. She moved quickly, like she'd done it before. She found the hidden report without needing me to point. She helped me gather a few clothes. We didn't take much. If he noticed anything missing, it might unravel everything. Before we left, I paused. I looked back at the apartment. The bed where I'd cried into the pillow, night after night. The mirror where I'd once written, "Just hold on a little longer," in red lipstick. The room I thought would be my sanctuary. I didn't cry. I didn't linger. I just turned to my mom and said, "Let's go." As the car pulled away from the street, I kept my head down. Not because I was afraid of being seen. But because I didn't want her to see me. Because I knew if she looked too closely, I'd fall apart. And once the dam broke, I wasn't sure I could put myself back together. But she saw anyway. She pulled over, turned around, and reached for my hand, her fingers gently wrapping around mine. And I couldn't hold it in anymore. The tears came hard and fast, the kind you can't quiet or swallow. "Mom," I choked, "I really tried. I'm not weak. I tried." "I know," she said softly. "I've always known." I sobbed. It's not that I didn't want to call for help. I just felt so ashamed. I didn't even want to admit it to myself. She didn't say, "Don't cry." She didn't say, "It's okay." She just held my hand. Steady. Solid. As if to say, "You're not crazy. You're not the problem. You just haven't been pulled to shore yet." And now I'm here. During that first week after I got out, I barely said a complete sentence. Mom didn't push me. She cooked. She tidied the house. Sometimes she sat beside me while the TV hummed in the background. But she never asked when I'd be ready to talk. Still, I knew she was waiting. It wasn't fear that kept me quiet. It was shame. I couldn't look her in the eye. When she turned away to head into the kitchen, I'd steal glances at her face, trying to read whether she was disappointed. Whether she thought I'd wasted her effort, her worry, her trip. But she just stayed. No interrogation. No blame. Not once did she say, "Why didn't you speak up sooner?" And the quieter she was, the worse it tore at me. I felt like a match soaked in water, meant to spark, desperate to burn, but sputtering out in a slow, sticky trail of smoke. Not fire. Not even ash. Just stuck somewhere in between. One night, I couldn't hold it anymore. I turned to her and said, "Mom." I knew he was controlling me. I knew for a long time. She didn't act surprised. She just asked gently, "Then why didn't you leave?" I lowered my head. My voice cracked as I said, "Because I thought it was my fault. I didn't make money. I didn't have many friends. I was bad at social stuff. Emotional. I thought the moment I left, people would say, 'See? She couldn't handle marriage.' I thought you might think that too." She sat beside me and held my hand. "Joanna," she said, soft, but certain. "The fact that you can say this out loud already makes you braver than most. You're not a failure. You're not the problem. You're just a girl who spent too long carrying the weight of someone else's mistakes." The tears came again, hard and fast. "I'm 36, Mom. I'm not a girl." She pulled me into her arms and whispered, "Then let me owe you one childhood. Let me give it back." That night, for the first time in what felt like years, I slept through without waking in a panic. The days after weren't easy. I started therapy. I reached out to old friends. I worked on my resume, practiced for online teaching interviews. I tried not to care about what the neighbors thought. I tried not to check if Todd had posted anything. I avoided the news comment sections where my name might be buried. But I knew it wasn't realistic. Some nights, I still woke up gasping, whispering I'm sorry into the dark. And those apologies, they weren't for him. They were for me. For every year I stayed, for every boundary I let slip, for every lie I told myself just to survive. But I've started to understand. I can't live in that I'm sorry forever. I survived. And that's the most honest answer I can give myself. A few days later, I went with Mom to return some books at the town library. The girl at the desk smiled and said, "Are you Madison Dawson's daughter? She comes in all the time, helps us organize the children's section." I froze for half a second before nodding. "Yes," I said. "I am." And just like that, for the first time, I claimed an identity in public without flinching. Not as someone's wife. Not as someone's shadow. But as someone's daughter. As someone. I realized that identity isn't something people assign you. It's something you claim. I'm not the woman who got hurt. I'm not the girl who was taken away. I'm Joanna Dawson. I'm alive. And I'm building a new life. Sometimes I think about Todd. Not with anger. Not with longing. Just distance. He was a period. An ending. He closed the door on the most chaotic decade of my life. And I am grateful, so deeply grateful, for the version of me who, in the dark, once typed, "This is not what marriage should be." If she hadn't written that, maybe I'd still be telling myself, "Just wait a little longer. Just hold on." That one sentence was the last spark of myself refusing to die out. Mom told me once, after I came home, that her biggest fear wasn't that Todd would come looking for me. It was that one day, I'd say, he wasn't that bad. I laughed when she said that. "I'll never say that." "How do you know?" she asked. I took her hand. Held it tight. Because I'm done being someone people excuse. I want to be someone who owns her life. She looked at me then. There was something shining in her eyes. Neither of us said another word. But I knew. She heard me. This morning, I hung my bed sheets out in the sun. The light was perfect. The breeze on the balcony drifted through like a quiet blessing, drying more than just cotton and linen. It dried the shame, the fear, the self-doubt I'd carried for so long. I stood there watching the white sheets sway gently in the wind, like they were waving at me. Joanna, I whispered to myself. What you have now is freedom. Not the kind you run toward after escaping someone else. But the kind you stay for, because you chose it for yourself. This freedom doesn't come with a standing ovation. There are no flowers. No dramatic soundtrack. But it's real. It's quiet. And it's rooted in every decision I've made since I stopped waiting for permission to live. I know there's still more ahead. Rebuilding. Learning to trust. Working again. Starting relationships. Letting people in. And maybe I'll get hurt. Maybe I'll love someone who doesn't deserve it. Maybe I'll stand in a crowded room and still feel alone. But I'm not afraid anymore. Because I am no longer the woman waiting for someone else to tell her who she is. I've come back to myself. I am Joanna. A woman standing in the sunlight.